In 1970, one company invented the personal computer. The same company invented the graphical user interface, the windows, icons, and folders that every computer on Earth uses today. They invented the mouse. They invented Ethernet networking. They invented the laser printer. They invented WYSIWYG word processing. In a single decade, inside a single building, a single group of engineers invented essentially everything that defines modern computing. Then their executives looked at all of it, decided it wasn't relevant to their business, and went back to selling photocopiers. Apple took those inventions and became worth $3 trillion. Microsoft took those inventions and became worth $3 trillion. Google, Amazon, and every tech company you have ever heard of runs on the foundation those engineers built. The company that invented all of it, today, it is worth less than a mid-sized shopping mall. Most people have never heard this story. By the end of this video, you will never think about your computer the same way again. This is Xerox PARC, the greatest laboratory in the history of technology and the most expensive mistake ever made in business. To understand how Xerox managed to throw away the entire future of computing, you first need to understand just how dominant and how arrogant they had become before any of this happened. Xerox was founded in 1906 as a paper company, and for most of its early history, it was entirely unremarkable. Then, in 1959, they released the Xerox 914, the world's first plain paper photocopier, and everything changed overnight. Before the 914, making copies of documents required a chemical process that was slow, expensive, and produced poor results. The 914 made copying as easy as pressing a button, and businesses across America bought or leased them as fast as Xerox could manufacture them. By 1968, Xerox had revenues exceeding $1 billion. In 1968 dollars. Their patents protected them so completely from competition that they essentially operated a legal monopoly on office copying for an entire decade, and the money poured in at a rate the company barely knew how to manage. Fortune magazine compared them to General Motors. Harvard Business School wrote case studies about their success. And then, as always happens with companies that become too comfortable too quickly, their executives began worrying about what came next. Copying technology would eventually be commoditized. Competition would eventually arrive. What would Xerox sell when everyone who wanted a copier already had one? Their solution was to invest in the future, to build a research laboratory so ambitious, so well-funded, and so free from corporate interference that it would invent whatever came after the photocopier. They called it the Palo Alto Research Center. They had absolutely no idea what they were about to create. In 1970, Xerox hired a computer scientist named Bob Taylor to lead PARC, and Taylor operated on a philosophy that was radical for a corporate research environment and has never been successfully replicated since. Hire only the best people in the world, pay them extremely well, give them unlimited resources, set zero deadlines, and get out of their way completely. There were no product roadmaps, no quarterly deliverables, no PowerPoint presentations to management about what the team was working on. Taylor's only requirement was excellence, and the people he hired defined what excellence looked like in computer science. Alan Kay arrived, a visionary who had been thinking for years about what personal computing could become. He would later describe his goal at PARC as inventing the future rather than predicting it. Butler Lampson and Chuck Thacker came, two of the most technically gifted systems engineers who have ever lived. Bob Metcalfe arrived and began quietly working on a problem involving how computers might communicate with each other over a shared cable. Larry Tesler came, who would eventually bring his ideas directly to Apple. The team that assembled in that low-slung building in Palo Alto between 1970 and 1972 represented a concentration of raw computing talent that has never been equaled before or since. And Xerox headquarters in Connecticut, 3,000 miles away, largely left them alone to do whatever they found interesting. What they found interesting changed the world. The first invention that matters for this story was completed in 1972, and it was called the Alto, and it was unlike anything that existed anywhere on Earth at that time. The Alto was a personal computer, not a mainframe shared by dozens of users, not a terminal connected to a distant machine, but a complete computer designed to sit on one person's desk and be used by that one person alone. And it did not work the way computers worked in 1972. Instead of requiring users to type arcane commands into a text terminal and wait for cryptic text responses, the Alto displayed something nobody outside of PARC had ever seen on a computer screen: a graphical desktop with overlapping windows, with icons representing files and folders, with a pointer that moved when you moved a small handheld device across the table. That device was a mouse, conceptually invented by Douglas Engelbart at Stanford a few years earlier, but refined and perfected at PARC into something genuinely usable by ordinary people. The Alto also connected to other Altos through a cable network called Ethernet, invented at PARC by Bob Metcalfe in 1973, which allowed the machines to share files and communicate in a way that foreshadowed everything we now call the Internet. They connected the Alto to a new kind of printer, also invented at PARC, that used a laser beam to produce perfect text and images on plain paper, the laser printer. The software running on the Alto included a word processor where what you saw on screen was exactly what would print on paper, WYSIWYG, which stands for What You See is What You Get, a concept so obvious in retrospect that it is hard to believe it needed to be invented, but it did, and PARC invented it. By 1973, PARC had built a complete, working, networked personal computing system with a graphical interface, a mouse, Ethernet, a laser printer, and advanced software. They were using it every day. And Xerox was selling photocopiers. The executives at Xerox headquarters knew PARC existed. They visited occasionally. They received briefings. They understood in an abstract sense that their engineers in California were building sophisticated computer technology. What they could not do, despite years of trying by the PARC engineers, was understand why it mattered or what to do with it. The fundamental problem was one of imagination constrained by success. Xerox's entire identity, its culture, its sales force, its management incentives, its self-understanding as a company, was built entirely around one product, the photocopier. That was what Xerox people knew how to sell. That was what Xerox investors expected the company to make. The idea of selling a computer to individual people for use in their homes and offices was so far outside the mental model of everyone who had decision-making power at Xerox that it simply did not compute, in the most literal sense. One senior Xerox executive, after being shown the Alto in a demonstration that included everything PARC had built, reportedly asked who would ever want a computer on their desk. The PARC engineers, who had spent 3 years building the answer to exactly that question, did not have a polite response. They escalated. They wrote memos. They gave demonstrations. They begged, with increasing desperation as the years passed, for Xerox to bring their technology to market before someone else did. Xerox heard them, nodded, and returned to focusing on copier sales. In December of 1979, a 24-year-old Steve Jobs arrived at PARC for a demonstration that would change the history of computing more than almost any other single event. The visit had been arranged as part of a business deal. Xerox would receive $1 million of Apple pre-IPO stock, and in exchange they would allow Apple engineers to tour PARC and see what had been built there. Apple got considerably the better end of that arrangement. The PARC team demonstrated the Alto, the graphical interface, the mouse, the overlapping windows, the icons, the complete system. Jobs, by the accounts of multiple people who were present in that room, became immediately and intensely agitated, pacing around the room, interrupting constantly, asking questions that arrived faster than they could be answered. He understood, within minutes of seeing the demonstration, something that Xerox's own executives had failed to understand in a decade of owning it. This was not a research project. This was the future of every computer that would ever be built. He left PARC and told his engineers at Apple that everything they were working on had to change immediately. The project that became the Apple Lisa was redirected around the concepts Jobs had seen. The project that followed, the Macintosh, brought a graphical user interface and a mouse to the mass market for the first time in 1984. When Jobs later confronted Bill Gates about Microsoft Windows copying the Macintosh interface, Gates responded with what has become one of the most famous quotes in tech history. "Well, Steve, I think there's more than one way of looking at it. I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it." Xerox did eventually attempt to sell their PARC technology to the world. In 1981, they released a product called the Xerox Star. 2 years after Jobs had seen the Alto, the same year IBM released the PC that would reshape the entire industry. The Star had a graphical interface, a mouse, Ethernet networking, and a laser printer connection. It was technically extraordinary. It also cost $16,000 per workstation, required corporate IT departments to manage and maintain, and was sold exclusively to large businesses rather than individuals. It sold in negligible numbers. The window had closed. As the Star failed in the market, the PARC engineers who had spent a decade building the future began to leave, one by one, and then in larger groups, taking their ideas with them into the broader world. Larry Tesla went to Apple, others went to Microsoft. Bob Metcalfe left to found 3Com and commercialize Ethernet. The knowledge and vision that had been concentrated in one building dispersed outward through Silicon Valley and eventually through the entire technology industry, growing into companies and products and standards worth trillions of dollars. Just not for Xerox. Apple released the Macintosh in 1984. Microsoft released Windows in 1985. The personal computer revolution that PARC had made possible generated more wealth than any other technological shift in human history. Xerox, the company that started all of it, participated almost none in any of it. PARC still exists today, spun off as an independent research organization, producing genuinely important work across multiple fields. The engineers who built the Alto and Ethernet and the laser printer and the GUI are now recognized by computer historians as among the most consequential humans who ever lived in terms of technological impact, a group whose work has touched the lives of every person on Earth who has ever used a computer, which at this point is almost everyone. Xerox itself survived but became a diminished company, worth today roughly $500 million. Apple is worth $3 trillion. Every device you own, every screen you look at, every network you connect to, carries the direct intellectual legacy of what was built at PARC between 1971 and 1980. The deepest lesson of Xerox PARC is not about invention. Invention, as PARC proves definitively, is the easy part. What destroyed Xerox was not a failure to innovate, it was a failure to believe. They saw the future, built the future, held the future in their hands, and could not make themselves understand that it was real. The computer you are watching this video on exists because of what Xerox built. The company that built it does not. The mouse in your hand right now, the windows on your screen, the network your device is connected to, all of it begins in a building in Palo Alto where a group of engineers built the modern world and watched someone else sell it. Next week, we are telling the story of the company that took what Xerox threw away and used it to build the most valuable business in human history. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm Core, and I will see you in the next one.